The joke left my mouth so casually that I forgot about it before the coffee in my hand even turned cold. I had no idea that a single sentence, spoken with a smile on an ordinary afternoon, would become the reason my entire life changed. If someone had told me that those careless words would lead me to love, heartbreak, sacrifice, and a family I never expected to have, I would have laughed. But life has a strange way of hiding miracles inside moments that seem too small to matter. I had known Emily for almost 3 years. We weren't close friends, but we worked in the same office building. She was the kind of person everyone respected because she carried herself with quiet confidence, even though sadness always seemed to live behind her smile. We exchanged greetings every morning, shared coffee during breaks once in a while, and occasionally talked about work, books, or the weather. One rainy evening, while we waited outside the building hoping the storm would slow down, she sighed and mentioned that her family reunion was coming up. Every year her relatives asked the same painful questions about why she was still single, why she didn't have children, and whether she was wasting her life by focusing on work. Trying to make her laugh, I grinned and said, "If you ever need a husband for an hour, call me." She smiled politely, shook her head, and we both walked away as if nothing important had happened. 3 days later my phone buzzed late at night. Her message was only 1 sentence long, but I read it 5 times before I believed it. She wrote that she remembered my joke and asked if I still meant it. At first I laughed, assuming she was teasing me back, but the next message arrived almost immediately. She explained that her grandmother had become seriously ill and desperately wanted to see Emily happily married before an upcoming surgery. The doctors were worried because of her age, and no one knew what would happen. Emily didn't want to lie forever. She only wanted to give an old woman one peaceful afternoon filled with hope. She ended the message by saying she understood if I refused. I stared at my phone for a long time. It sounded ridiculous. Pretending to be someone's husband was something that happened in movies, not real life. Yet I kept thinking about the sadness hidden in her eyes every morning. I imagined an elderly woman lying in a hospital bed wishing for one last comforting memory. I couldn't ignore it. The next morning I called Emily and simply said yes. She thanked me so quietly that it almost sounded like she was trying not to cry. The following Saturday we drove to her grandmother's countryside home. During the ride she explained every detail I needed to know. Her grandmother's name was Margaret. She had raised Emily after her parents died in a car accident when she was only 11. Margaret had sacrificed everything so her granddaughter could have an education and a future. Emily had spent years caring for her in return, but work had kept her busy recently, and guilt weighed heavily on her heart. Listening to her story, I realized this wasn't about fooling an old woman. It was about giving back love to someone who had spent a lifetime giving it away. When we arrived, Margaret welcomed us with tears in her eyes before I even stepped through the front door. She held both our hands as though she had been praying for that exact moment. I expected to feel awkward pretending, but the warmth in that little house made acting almost impossible. Margaret wasn't interested in expensive rings or wedding stories. She simply wanted to see Emily smiling again. She watched us prepare lunch together, laughed when we accidentally burned the bread, and kept saying that the house finally felt alive again. By evening I noticed something unexpected. Emily wasn't pretending anymore. Around her grandmother she looked different. The heavy walls she built around herself disappeared, revealing a woman who laughed freely, teased me over silly mistakes, and smiled with genuine happiness. I found myself wishing that version of her existed every day. Before we left, Margaret pulled me aside. Her hands were weak, but her eyes were incredibly sharp. She thanked me for loving her granddaughter. I wanted to confess everything, but before I could speak she smiled gently and whispered that sometimes people meet in unusual ways because life knows what they need before they do. Those words followed me all the way home. After that weekend, Emily and I expected life to return to normal. Instead, we began talking every day. What started as messages checking on Margaret slowly turned into conversations lasting until midnight. We discovered that we both loved old movies, long road trips, and volunteering at local shelters. We shared childhood memories, embarrassing stories, and dreams we had never told anyone else. Somewhere between those conversations, pretending stopped completely. One evening she admitted that Margaret had passed her surgery successfully but still had a long recovery ahead. She also confessed that she felt terrible for lying. I told her the truth. The happiness on her grandmother's face had been real, and maybe kindness sometimes mattered more than perfect honesty. She smiled with tears in her eyes, and for the first time she reached across the table and held my hand. From that day forward we stopped hiding what we felt. Months passed, and we officially started dating. Our relationship wasn't perfect. We argued about small things, struggled with busy schedules, and occasionally questioned whether everything had begun for the wrong reasons. Whenever doubt appeared, we remembered that rainy afternoon and laughed about the joke that refused to stay a joke. Then life surprised us again. Margaret's health suddenly declined. Emily spent every possible moment beside her hospital bed. I stayed too, bringing food, helping nurses whenever I could, and reading books aloud during long evenings. One quiet night Margaret asked everyone else to leave the room except me. She looked at me for a long time before speaking. Then she smiled knowingly and admitted that she had figured out the truth almost immediately. She said no newly married couple looked at each other with that much uncertainty. She had simply chosen not to expose us because she saw something even more important than honesty. She saw two lonely people slowly becoming each other's home. She thanked me for giving Emily hope again and asked me to promise that I would never stop making her granddaughter laugh. I couldn't hold back my tears. A week later Margaret passed away peacefully. The funeral was one of the hardest days of Emily's life. She stood silently beside the grave after everyone else had left, staring at the flowers until sunset painted the sky orange. She kept blaming herself for every moment she hadn't spent with her grandmother. I wrapped my arms around her and reminded her that love isn't measured by perfect timing. It's measured by showing up when it matters most. She cried against my shoulder for what felt like hours, and I silently thanked fate for allowing me to be there. Grief changed both of us. Instead of pulling apart, we grew closer. We began volunteering together at a retirement home because Emily wanted other elderly people to feel less lonely. Every Saturday we listened to stories from people whose families rarely visited. Some residents remembered our names, while others forgot them minutes later. It didn't matter. Their smiles reminded us that kindness is rarely wasted. Nearly a year after my careless joke, I returned to the same cafe where everything had begun. I carried a small velvet box in my pocket and felt more nervous than I had ever been. Emily arrived wearing the same blue sweater she had worn on that rainy afternoon. Before I could lose my courage, I told her that pretending had been the easiest part. The difficult part was accepting that she had become the person I wanted beside me for the rest of my life. When I opened the ring box, she covered her face with both hands and cried before I even finished asking the question. She said yes. Our wedding wasn't luxurious. We invited close friends, neighbors, co-workers, and several residents from the retirement home who had become part of our extended family. During the ceremony an empty chair stood in the front row with a single white rose resting on it. It was reserved for Margaret, whose love had unknowingly brought two strangers together. Years have passed since then, and sometimes I still smile whenever it rains. Our children love hearing the story of how their parents met. They always laugh when I tell them it all started because of one silly joke. They don't fully understand it yet, but one day they will realize that words spoken with kindness can travel farther than we ever imagine. Looking back, I understand that life rarely changes because of grand speeches or dramatic plans. More often, it changes because we choose compassion instead of indifference. I could have ignored that late-night message. I could have decided that helping someone was too inconvenient or too strange. Instead, I answered with a simple yes, never knowing that my future family was waiting on the other side of that decision. Whenever someone asks me if I believe in destiny, I remember the rain, the coffee, the joke, and the message that changed everything forever. Maybe destiny isn't about magical coincidences after all. Maybe it's about ordinary people choosing kindness when life quietly gives them the chance. If this story stays with you after you've finished reading, carry one lesson into your own life. Never underestimate the power of a small act of compassion. A joke can become hope. A favor can become friendship. A stranger can become family. And one unexpected moment can become the beginning of the most beautiful chapter you never saw coming. The greatest miracles rarely announce themselves. They arrive disguised as ordinary days, waiting for ordinary people to make extraordinary choices.